I think many people are aware that the release of the Epstein files and the whole case around Epstein raises a lot of questions. And one of the big questions that is not really being asked and considered by many people is, why did Jeffrey Epstein and his clients, why did they need to have sex with young girls, or young boys for that matter? Why does it make a difference that you have sex with a young person versus an adult? What do you get out of having sex with a young person that you don't get out of having sex with an adult? To me, that's a very important question to consider, because it actually explains why these people are doing this, and why you see some rich, intelligent people who have a prestigious position in society, why they are willing to risk this by engaging in sex with minors. I mean, why are they willing to risk their career and their position? Why are they willing to engage in what you can only call juvenile behavior in order to have sex? What is it that drives them? Why do they have to have sex? Why is it almost like an addiction to have sex with young children? And that's the question I'm going to answer here. And I did a previous video where I talked about the Epstein files, and I called it a spiritual perspective on the Epstein files. But I tried to keep that at a very universal level, where I basically talked about there is a power elite who believes that they should be able to buy anything they want, and for them, young girls are just a commodity. If they want to have sex with young girls, they should be able to buy it. But in this video, I'm going to go much deeper, because the fact is, we can answer that question of why they need to have sex with young girls, but only when you go deeper into a spiritual understanding. And with a spiritual understanding, I really mean something that's beyond the mainstream worldview, whether you grow up in a religious setting or a materialist, atheist setting. You can't find the answer to this question by looking at the mainstream worldview. But if you adopt a spiritual worldview, you can find answers. And that's what I'm going to give. And we're going to give it in different stages. So I'm going to go deeper and deeper. So what I want to start with is the simplest possible explanation. What do people get out of having sex with young girls? They get energy. That's the simplest explanation. They get more energy from having sex with a child than they get from having sex with an adult. And they need that energy. So, just to give you a simple explanation for this. We've all seen this equation. E equals mc squared. Now what we can do, which you all learned in math, is we can divide with the same factor on both sides of the equal mark. So we now get this equation. And of course on this side, they cancel each other out. So what we actually end up getting is an equation that says energy divided by a very big factor, speed of light squared, equals mass. Well, what is energy? Scientists say energy is a form of vibration. And that means that energy has a certain vibration as a primary energy, primal energy. But when it is reduced in vibration by a certain factor, it becomes mass, or rather matter. And that means, which I think most scientists, most physicists would agree with, that matter is actually another form of energy. So that means that most of us were brought up with this dualistic view that there's a matter world here, and that's solid matter. And then there's an energy world, and that's energy waves. But this is what scientists have realized, not just because of Einstein, but also because of quantum physics, that it's not the case. Everything is actually energy. Matter is just another form of energy. Like I said, there is a level of energetic vibrations that's much higher than what we have in the material world. And what we call matter is simply energy from this higher realm that has been reduced in vibration. The vibration has been lowered to become what we call matter. And it's still energy, it's still vibrating energy. We just can't see that with our physical senses. So right now, what you are looking at, this body is actually made of energy, but obviously we can't detect the vibrations because they're so quick that our senses can't see the individual vibrations. So the reason why this is important is that every human interaction involves an exchange of energy. So what we can also say, which many spiritual people of course are open to, is that beyond our physical bodies, we have an energy field or an aura. And this is simply energy that vibrates at a higher level of vibration than the energies that make up the physical body. So that means when you and I meet, we might shake hands, but our energy bodies, our energy fields are actually interacting. When we talk, when we look at each other, just by being in proximity, there is an exchange of energy. And this energy takes place both at the higher levels, but it is of course interwoven with the physical body, because the physical body is part of our total energy field. So physical contact can force an exchange of energy that you don't have if you don't have the physical contact. And of course, one of the closest forms of physical contact is sexual intercourse. So, in other words, what do these pedophiles get out of having sex with children? An exchange of energy that is forced because of the physical intercourse. Now, I'm saying, what do they get out of it? And it might sound like they're getting energy from the children they're having sex with. And that is true, they do get energy. So let's look at this first. What do they get out of having sex with children versus adults? Well, they get more energy from a child, especially if that child hasn't had sexual intercourse before, if they are a virgin. And the reason for this is that a child is born with a certain amount of energy. And this is what we see in children, that many children seem innocent. They have a certain innocence over them. And you can look at it this way, that every child is born with a certain gift of energy, or a certain amount of energy that they have. And throughout life, you can either increase the positive energy you have, or you can lose it. And normally, of course, it's meant that children should be allowed to grow to adult age, keeping most of their energy, keeping their innocence. But of course, many children lose that energy because they're exposed to abuse. It's not only sexual abuse, physical abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse. This can also cause children to lose their energy. But one of the most drastic ways that children lose their energy is through sexual intercourse at too early of an age. And when that is, I don't really have a clear answer to that because it's individual, but I think it's reasonable to take what most societies say, where they have an age limit, where you say it's illegal to have sex with children under a certain age. I think that's a reasonable starting point. So the fact of the matter is that when an adult has sex with an underaged person, that forces the child to release some of its innocent energy, and it's absorbed into the energy field of the perpetrator. And the more violent the situation is, in other words, if the child feels like it's being violated and raped, it releases more energy than if it's consensual. And so this is one thing. They get energy. And that's why they, in a sense, you know, I assume, I don't know from experience, but I assume that they feel a certain rush. I mean, beyond the sexual pleasure, beyond the sexual gratification, they feel a certain rush. Either they feel they have power over the child, but I think they just feel a rush from the influx of energy. And when they have this several times, I think they get addicted to it. It simply becomes an addiction. They have to have it again and again. It's not enough to just have it once. And that's why you see that, you know, repeat business for Epstein, and himself also, he was addicted to it. But the question now is, why do they need it? Because most adults don't have this need to have sex with children. So why are there some, especially men, who have that need? And the answer is simply, well, it's actually, there's two reasons for it. But the main reason is they don't have enough of this vital energy in their personal energy fields. They simply don't have enough. They have a deficit of this energy. And they need to get it from other people. So this is one reason, and we'll explore that in just a minute. But the other reason they need to have sex with children is they need to get rid of energy. So what I've said is children have a certain innocent energy, a certain pure energy, we could say, higher vibration, high frequency energy. And the pedophile absorbs that, really extracts it out of the energy field of the child. But because of the close proximity, and because the child is innocent and unaware and not really able to guard itself, the pedophile can also project out or lose some of the negative energy they have in their energy fields. So what this leads to is that we can say every human being has an energy field around their physical bodies. And at any time there's a balance. It's kind of like your bank account. You know, there's a certain balance. You either have money in your account or you had debt. You're either in the hole or you're in the surplus. And so the question simply is, where are you at? And this isn't just a matter, it's not quite as simple as money, because you can have a certain amount of positive energy while at the same time having a certain amount of low frequency energy. And so you can have both in your energy field. So the balance really is not just how much positive energy do you have, but also how much negative, or rather how little negative. So the less negative energy you have, the more positive energy you have, the better you're going to feel about yourself. The more at peace you're going to be, the more creative you're going to be, the more you're going to actually enjoy life. And when I say enjoy life, I mean in a peaceful way, rather than this obsessive-compulsive need to have something. If your energy balance is too low, your general attitude to life is lack. You're lacking something, and you need to have it. That's why you can see some of these people. They're millionaires or billionaires. They really have the money to enjoy life, but they can't because they are lacking something, and they have to get it by having sex with children. And what they are lacking is both they need more positive energy, but they need to get rid of some of the negative energy. So this is the basic understanding of human interactions that you get from adopting a spiritual outlook. There's much more to come, but this is the basic one, and it explains a lot already there. You can, for example, look at, as I said in my previous video where I talked about a spiritual perspective on the Epstein files, I talked about the power elite. And you can see that there's a power elite of very rich people on earth. And you can see that they have interchanges with other people that follow a certain pattern, where the elite is always superior. They are entitled, they feel they are entitled to being treated differently. They are treated with respect, admiration, deference. People submit to them. People who, they all employ servants, for example. So let's say a rich person has a mansion. And there's a bunch of servants, from the gardeners to the maids to the cleaners to the cooks. And whenever they interact with these people, there's an energy exchange. And what very often happens in this situation is that the rich people get energy from their employees. They get positive energy from them through their reverence or deference or whatever. And they get rid of some of their negative. You have the classical example of a rich person who is scolding one of his employees for not doing a good enough job. Well, the rich person is just unloading his or her negative energy on the servants. And you see this throughout the ages. The Middle Ages, the feudal lords who treated their employees as slaves or their underlings as slaves, and even today. Many billionaires fall into this pattern. They just treat people a certain way, and they expect people to accept that, to take whatever abuse they're exposing them to, and this then creates that exchange of energy. If you submit to their abuse, for example, you're taking in the negative energy from them, and you also give them some of your positive. But even if you are not being abused, but you're just serving them by submitting to them, you're giving them some of your positive energy. So now the question is, why do these rich people need to get energy from others? And in order to understand that, we have to go into a deeper spiritual understanding of life. And what we have to understand basically is, as I said before, energy reduced by a certain factor creates the matter world. The matter world is created out of this. But what we really could also say is that this means that there is a stream of energy from a higher realm, a level of higher vibrations, into the material world. Constant stream of energy. And this stream of energy is not only what created the material world, but it also upholds it. In other words, if this stream of energy was stopped, the material world would start disintegrating. And this is actually proven, crazily enough, by science. I'm not trying to say that I have scientific proof of spiritual outlook on life, but I'm just saying there is an indication, because science has discovered a natural law called the second law of thermodynamics. And what it basically says is, in a closed system, entropy will increase. Entropy means disorder. So that means you look at the world as it is today. If the stream of energy from a higher realm was cut off, the material world would become a closed system and it would start disintegrating. You can ask yourself, how is it possible that the world is becoming more and more complex, that the physical universe is expanding and at an accelerated rate? Well, that's because there's a stream of energy from a higher realm into what we call the material frequency spectrum. That's why the world is evolving and growing. And so if that was cut off, and so the reason why this is important is the same holds true for an individual. You are conscious because in a higher realm, in a realm of higher vibrations, you have a higher self. And from that higher self, there is streaming a stream of high frequency energy into your personal energy field. And if that was cut off, you would start disintegrating unless you could get energy from the material realm, energy that has already been lowered to that spectrum. But where would you get that energy from? Well, from other people who who are still receiving energy from their higher selves. That is the entire spiritual background for any kind of abuse. It goes for the sexual abuse you see with Epstein. It goes from war, torture, killings, verbal abuse. It's all a matter of people who are abusing others, using force against others. They're trying to force other people to give them their energy because they don't have enough coming from their higher selves. And so now we can draw a couple of conclusions here. Number one, there are these very rich and seemingly powerful people who seems to have abilities to be leaders, to have prominent positions in society, to start businesses, run governments, do all these kind of things. But they still have to engage in this abusive behavior in order to get energy. So in other words, they don't have enough energy flowing from their higher selves, because otherwise you wouldn't need to steal it from others. So what you basically get is that there are certain people, there's even a certain class or certain group of people who are what we could call energy vampires. They need to extract energy from other people in order to survive, but also in order to exercise power over others. And I can give you there are many examples from history, but I think a very obvious one is Adolf Hitler. You can find on the internet very easily video recordings of him having these rallies in the 1930s in Germany, where he had this big stadium, there was the Nazi emblems behind him, he was up on a podium and he was giving this fiery speech. And sometimes you can see that the audience was sitting there and they were like hypnotized, their eyes were like glazed over. Kind of like young girls screaming at their favorite band, or people being hypnotized by a cult leader. But they were totally into him, and they were screaming, Heil Hitler and this and that. But what were they doing? They were giving him their energy. Hitler needed to have these rallies in order to get energy to do what he was going to do by taking over the government, running the government, and basically hypnotizing the people around him to submit. Many people said that he had a certain aura, a certain energy field that would cause some people to submit. Now, not everybody. Some people met Hitler and weren't impressed whatsoever or even discussed with him. But some people submitted to this because he had enough energy that he could almost hypnotize them. And he got that energy from the people in the rallies who submitted to him, and even the ones that submitted when they were not at a rally, but they thought he was the greatest leader ever. And so what I'm trying to show you here is that there is a power elite, and there always has been throughout history, of people who, from a surface perspective, seem very powerful and seem to have energy to get a lot of things done. But the reason they can do this is that they have stolen that energy from other people in various ways, including the sexual abuse of children, or sexual abuse of adults for that matter. So this is what, it opens up a lot of perspectives on looking at history, looking at our world today, where you just realize that these people, they are not nearly as impressive as they can seem based on their outer accomplishments. And I think this is important because when you consider that it was 2008 when Epstein was convicted the first time, and there were still these powerful people who had relationship with him after that, and it's like, why haven't the authorities persecuted some of these people? Why is it just Epstein and Maxwell that were pulled to court? Why not others? Why haven't there been consequences? Well, because these rich and powerful people had this aura around them where they believe they are untouchable. And people submit to this. And they don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to accuse anybody. They don't want to say what's obvious. I mean, I took note that there was one of the Epstein files where Trump had talked to a police chief in Florida. And he had said, oh, everybody knew what Epstein was doing. This, of course, contradicts what Trump has said, that he had no idea what Epstein was doing. But nevertheless, I think it's true. Everybody in New York and Florida, not everybody, but a lot of people, knew what Epstein was doing. Why didn't they stop it? Why didn't they stop the abuse to protect the victims? Because they were hypnotized by this spell cast by this power elite. And that is what I think would be the best possible outcome of the whole Epstein case if that spell begins to break. I think it's already begun to break for many people, but a lot of people haven't seen it. Okay, so now this of course leaves some questions, as I said. Every human interaction is an exchange of energy. You can receive positive energy, you can get rid of negative energy, you can dump it on others. And when you look at this sexual abuse, there's both things are happening. The perpetrator, the rapist, whatever you want to call them, pedophiles, they gain positive energy from the child, they dump negative energy on them. That's often while the victims feel so burdened afterwards. They may feel they are ashamed, they are feeling powerless, but it's a lot of times it's simply the negative energy that was dumped into their energy field when they were raped. And so, so now we can say, okay, but how did these people get to a point where they have this deficit of energy, so they need to abuse others to get energy? And in order to understand this, you need to understand two things. First of all, this stream of energy that's coming from your higher self, it isn't just a free flow, it's not a free ride. There are no free lunches, as they say. Because the reality is you're receiving a certain amount of energy. And whatever you do, your thoughts, your feelings, your actions, everything is consuming energy. Everything you do is done with energy. I mean, we know this. We get energy from the physical food we are eating, and that gives energy to the physical body. But beyond that is the psychic energy that allows us to think and feel. So, some of the energy that we are receiving from our higher selves is going to be used in activity, thoughts, feelings, actions. That's perfectly fine, that's perfectly natural. But the question now is, what kind of actions are we partaking in? Not just physical actions, but also emotional and mental. Do they live up to a certain rule? And what might that rule be? Well, it's actually what most religions or spiritual philosophies call the golden rule. Don't do to others what you don't want others to do to you. It's really quite simple. Because the thing is, if you are doing something to others that you don't want them to do to you, if you're abusing others, the energy that comes from your higher self is going to be qualified with a low vibration, a fear-based vibration. Because basically, if you are using force against others, you're doing it out of fear. A sense of lack, that you don't have enough. You think you have to force others to get what you want. So the energy coming from your higher self is going to be lowered in vibration below a certain threshold. It's fear-based. What does that mean? It means it stays now in the material spectrum. Not just the physical, but also the emotional, mental, and so in other words, it stays in your energy field at the level of the material world and the energy field here. It can't flow back up. But if you keep to the golden rule and treat others the way you want to be treated, don't use force against them, you're qualifying that energy with a love-based vibration, meaning it can flow back up. And whatever flows back up to your higher self will be multiplied and sent back to you. But if you qualified with fear-based, it can't flow up, and therefore there's nothing for the higher self to multiply. That means you're depleting your energy. Whereas if you are keeping the golden rule, you are expanding the energy you have available to you. Because it's actually a parable that Jesus told 2,000 years ago, where he talked about 3 servants. They're called in by their master. He says, I'm going away, but I'm giving you a certain number of talents. So one gets 10, one gets 5, one gets 2. Then he goes away, comes back, called the servants again to give account. What have you done with the talents I gave you? Well, one of them had buried them in the ground. And that's a symbol for what I said. You violate the golden rule, you lower the energy from your higher self below a certain vibration. It can't go back up, so there's nothing to multiply. But the 2 servants who had multiplied the talents by adhering to the golden rule and doing something that was beneficial to others and to themselves, they received more in return. There was an acceleration. So what you see now is that the people who have this energy deficit, they have this energy deficit because they are violating the golden rule. They are willing to use force against other people. It can be in actions, it can be emotionally, mentally, willing to manipulate or control other people. But they think they have to use force. So they have gotten themselves into this force-based mindset, we might say. Now, in order to really understand this, you have to also accept a very common belief among spiritual people, namely reincarnation. Because the reality is that the people who have this energy deficit, it didn't happen in this lifetime. It happened over many previous lifetimes. So what you see is that if you go back to when a new soul or life stream first incarnated on Earth, most people, they were in a innocent, normal state of mind. I'm saying most people, and I'll explain later the exceptions. So basically what can happen is that over many lifetimes, you are building a positive relationship with your higher self, therefore you're receiving more and more energy. That explains some of the more creative, some of the more benevolent people that are selflessly working to help others. But you can also go the other way. In other words, you can come to a point where you start lowering the energy by violating the golden rule. And therefore you receive less and less. So in other words, the stream from your higher self is reduced to the point where you only receive enough energy from your higher self to stay conscious. If you had no energy from your higher self, you wouldn't even be conscious. So there's always a certain minimum amount of energy that allows you to stay conscious. But you really can't do anything. So you do see people today who are almost powerless or paralyzed. It's almost like they can't do anything. They can't do anything with their lives. They can't be productive. They can't be creative. They can't hold a job. They really can't do it. And it can be because they have been wounded in past lives, but it can also be, in some cases, because the energy they receive from the higher selves has been reduced, and they haven't gone into this mindset of being willing to steal from others. But what you see is that there's a power elite of people who have, over a long time in their previous lives, they have reduced the stream from their higher selves, but they have learned how to steal energy horizontally from other people. And they do it in various ways. Whenever people talk about conspiracies, they always come up with these satanic rituals, and a satanic ritual is an attempt to steal energy horizontally. But it's by far not the only way. And pedophilia, raping children, having sex with children, is simply another way to steal energy horizontally. And of course, they also dump their negative energy, because, as I said, the energy you qualify with a love-based vibration rises up to your higher self and is multiplied. So that means you're creating a figure-8 flow between your higher self and you, and it increases. But if you don't have that negative flow, and you qualify energy with a lower vibration, that energy accumulates in your personal energy field. So you can say, you can simply look at a person's energy field. And by the way, scientists have found ways to measure the human energy field. And I think they can probably also make it visible through digital cameras. But anyway, that's besides the point here. What I'm saying is, if you look at a person's energy field, if the negative energy accumulated in their field goes beyond a certain threshold, they start feeling bad about themselves. And what you will see in some of these rich and powerful people is that they are going into these cycles. And for that matter, many other people. But what you especially see with the rich and powerful, as I said, they have the money, right? They should be able to live a comfortable, pleasant life. But they can't, because they're driven by something. And sometimes it's an ambition, but sometimes it's simply that gradually the negative energy accumulates in their energy field to the point where they can't stand it. They can't stand being in their own energy field. So they have to have some kind of release. And that is some kind of wild party or orgy. And it can be sex with children, because now they can dump some of their negative energy on the innocent child, which, without knowing it, absorbs it. And as I said, that's why these victims often feel so bad after the abuse, because of the negative energy. So what I'm saying is, you see these people who have everything. They could live a good life, but they can't. They can't stop themselves. And this is typical for this power elite. They can't stop themselves. They can't just live a balanced, normal life, because they have this accumulating negative energy, the decreasing positive energy, and there comes a point where they can't stand being in their own energy field, and they have to do something to get rid of the bad and to get more positive energy, to steal more positive energy. Now, some may find a certain balance, where they don't have to go into this extreme behavior, where they're still abusing people in a mile away, like I said, the servants in their mansion. They're giving them some positive energy, they're dumping negative energy on them so they can keep a certain balance. But you see that there's a certain class of people that can't. They have to engage in this abusive behavior. Or they have to have their underlings torture people. I mean, torture is another extreme way of forcing people to give positive energy or take in negative. And that's why you will see that many dictatorial regimes, they have to use torture. And you can ask yourself, the excuse for torture is usually, we're trying to extract energy. I mean, we're trying to extract information. But everybody realizes that the information you get through torture is not reliable. There comes a point where the torture is so intense that people will admit to anything just to get the pain to stop. So you have to say there's a deeper reason for torture, and that is precisely this: stealing energy, which then goes up through the system to the dictator at the top. And of course it dumps energy as well, because as people are being tortured, what happens in both torture and rape really should be considered another form of torture, but what happens is that people are put in a state of mind where they are completely overwhelmed. Often you see these abuse victims, they're saying, but I couldn't do anything, I was paralyzed, I couldn't say no, I couldn't resist. So they are put in a state of mind where they are overwhelmed, and that means the normal mechanism you have for self-defense, for defending your energy field, is suspended, which means you cannot consciously decide not to release positive energy or not to take in negative. Your boundaries are violated, so you're open to having energy extracted and having energy projected into your energy field. Okay, so what we see here is there is a class of people, a group of people, power elite people, that have this need to abuse others to get energy because they're not getting enough from their higher selves, and they have learned over many lifetimes how to force people to give them energy and how to force people to take on the negative energy. And I think once people start realizing this, it has ramifications not just for the sexual abuse, but other areas of society, where you see this all over. And as I said, dictators, but there can be leaders of companies, there can be other people like that, noble class of medieval Europe and so forth. So I think it's very important that the population come to realize this, that there is simply this group of people. And they are, you always talk about narcissists, sociopaths, psychopaths, but they are really in a state of mind where it's all about them. It's all about them. And the rest of the human population, we are just there to serve them, including physical labor, but also energy. We should take on their negative energy. We should give them our positive energy. We are just commodities for them. We are sort of cows to be milked for our energy. And when people realize that, we can of course start saying, no, we don't want to be part of this scheme anymore. Okay, but there are actually deeper levels of this. Perhaps you think it's already enough, but there are actually deeper levels of it. And the next level we'll consider is, I've said, right now you're looking at me and you're probably only seeing my physical body. But if you were able to see energies, you would see there's an energy field around my physical body as there is around yours and everybody's. Okay. But if you take this to a larger scale, there's also an energy field around the planet. And that energy field is made up of what we could call the collective consciousness. Because the energy fields of you and I and everybody combines to create this planetary energy field, the collective consciousness, a collective energy field that we're all part of, we're all inside of it. We contribute to it, but we live inside of it. We live inside of this energy field. And that means what? Well, that means there is an exchange of energy, not just between human beings, but also between an individual and a collective field. So in other words, you can give some of your positive energy to the collective energy field, or you can take in some of the energy from the collective field. You can also dump some of your negative energy to the collective field, or you can take in negative energy from the collective field. So there's an exchange both ways. And this is really, really important actually, because it explains an awful lot of things. First of all, for example, mental illness. You can have people that are schizophrenic, multiple personality disorder, and in some cases it's simply their personal energy fields have become open to the collective field, and they are, at least at times, overwhelmed by an influx of energy from the collective field. But it also explains, as I said, why there are these people who become obsessive-compulsive. They can't stand being in their own energy field, and that's also because they are giving some of their positive energy to the collective field, receiving negative energy from the collective field. This actually explains pretty much all addictions. Pretty much all addictions. Because what makes a person addicted to something, whether it's a substance or whether it's sex with minors, is this. When you engage in a certain behavior, you are giving some energy into the collective field, and you might be receiving negative energy from it. So what I'm trying to point out here is, here you have a pedophile raping a child. And yes, the pedophile is exchanging energy with the child, stealing positive energy, dumping negative energy. But at the same time, that pedophile, by doing this act that violates other people, it violates the golden rule, is opening its own energy field to the collective, and is also giving positive energy to the collective, receiving negative energy from it. And in the time after, it's receiving negative energy from the collective. And this gradually builds up to the point where a person can't stand it anymore. Now it has to engage in sex with minors again. It's the addictive spiral that goes that way. But what is it in the collective field that these people are exchanging energy with? Well, here's where we need to take another step. We need to realize that we human beings, it's not all just energy. It's also consciousness, because we are conscious beings. And with conscious, I don't mean the consciousness you find in, for example, animals. I mean self-awareness. And because we are self-aware, we can create with our minds. Now, this is something that can take a little bit, if you haven't heard this idea before, it can take some getting used to. But it actually, if you have any kind of a spiritual outlook on life, it's actually fairly easy to realize this. Because many spiritual teachings are talking about this, that your state of mind has a major impact on what happens in your life. You are sort of creating your own circumstances by what you're projecting out. It's kind of like the universe is a mirror, and whatever you project out will be reflected back to you. As in a sense what Jesus said in this parable about the talents. If you multiply the talents, you'll be giving more. If you bury them in the ground, you'll receive less. So, so what happens is that when human beings engage in a certain behavior, they are releasing energy and receiving energy. And some of this energy doesn't go just in the personal energy fields, it also goes into the collective. But what we are doing is always done with consciousness. And that means that the energy over time can become concentrated in a certain matrix that forms an entity, a living conscious entity in the collective field. And this entity we are creating because we are conscious. But the entity itself is not self-aware, but it has a certain level of consciousness. In other words, the entity knows it was created by human beings engaging in sex with minors. It only exists because it's continually receiving energy. It even has a desire to grow, so it wants to receive more energy. And how does it receive energy? When people engage in sex with minors. So the entity, even though it isn't self-aware, it still wants to influence people to have sex with minors so it can survive and so it can strengthen itself. You see what I'm saying? Over time, over a long period of time, people engaging in sexual abuse of children have created this entity in the collective consciousness. And of course there are many others. Smoking, alcohol, drugs, torture, whatever. There are many of these. So, but let's focus on this. Throughout time, throughout the ages, and you can see this happened even in the Roman Empire, they had sex with children. So this has created an entity in the collective consciousness. And this entity is always projecting its energy or its thought matrix at people. Now, most people are not vulnerable to this. They may be vulnerable to another kind of addiction, but they're not vulnerable to this particular sex abuse entity. But some are. And once you open your personal energy field to it, once you engage in the activity, you are in a way submitting yourself to the entity. And why would people do that? Well, first of all, they don't know they're doing it. But they do it because, let's say, here's a person. He has been rich, he's been used to, he can buy whatever he wants, he's had sex with all the adult women he can think of, but now he hears about this guy who says, oh, you should try to have, so he's getting bored. He's done everything, he's bored. So here's this guy say, oh, you should try and have sex with young girls, that's such a rush. And then he tries it, and the first time he gets this incredible rush out of it, partly because he receives energy from the child, but also because he receives energy from that collective entity that's giving him some energy that gives him this incredible rush. And now, in the time after he's had sex, the entity has an inroad into his energy field, so now it's releasing negative energy. So now you have this build-up in a person's energy field of the negative energy that reinforces or magnifies his desire to have sex again. So now he has sex with another young girl, but it's not quite as big of a rush as the first time. And now he gets into this chasing that ultimate rush. And it never happens. It's never enough. See, first of all, you can never recreate the first time, because the first time there was a contrast between you hadn't experienced this before and now you're experiencing it for the first time. It goes for almost any addiction. You can never recreate it. But the other thing is, it's never enough. Why? Because whatever you can do with your personal energy field, however much energy you can release or take in, it's never enough for the collective entity. Because the collective entity is so much bigger than a personal energy field. And so once you submit yourself to this entity, you get into this addictive cycle. You can engage in the activity and you can feel a temporary rush, but it's never enough. So you're always chasing this pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And you know why you're never going to find the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow? Because there is no rainbow in reality. You can look out, you can be outside when it's raining and it's sunny, and you're seeing a rainbow that ends on a particular hill. But if you start walking towards it, the rainbow is going to move, because you're only seeing the rainbow from a particular vantage point. It's a vision in your mind from a particular vantage point. When you change your vantage point, the rainbow moves. You're never going to catch up to the rainbow. It's the same thing here. It's never going to be enough. So what we actually see now is that you have this class of people, this whole power elite of people, who are chasing something. It could be the ultimate rush of having sex, it could be riches, it could be power, it could be admiration, it could be basically desire to be like a god on earth that everybody's worshipping, like you've had these leaders that people thought they were gods in embodiment. But it's never enough for them, and it never will be. So what you see is, again, this. So many activities, so many human activities are driven by this impossible quest for something ultimate that could never be achieved in the first place. And you think about how many lives, energies, money, attention is being eaten up by this, and it's all vanity of vanities. All is vanity. Completely futile. You look right now what's going on in Ukraine. What is this driven by? Putin and the people around him are on this quest to feel they have this ultimate power of the Russian Empire. One man or a few people around him are trapped in this desire, and it's an impossible quest because it will never be enough for them. It's just like Hitler. He wanted to take on the whole world at the same time. But if Hitler or Putin or the Roman Emperor or Xi Jinping conquered the whole world, that wouldn't be enough for them. They would be like Elon Musk, Oh, are there other planets we can conquer? What about the whole universe? Why? Because these people their minds are taken over by these collective entities, and it's never going to be enough for them. They always want more energy. So this is one thing. And this explains quite a lot, but it's not really the deepest explanation we can go to. So in order to go to this deeper level, there's a couple of things we need to discuss. I actually have a video called How the World Was Created. And if you really want to go in depth with this, you need to watch that video, because I'm going to give just a summary here. But the question we need to ask ourselves is, here is Epstein, or one of his clients. So here's a man. He's got all the money he wants. He can do whatever he wants. Live a pleasant life. But he can't stop himself from having sex with children. You know, he knows it's wrong. He knows it's not morally, he knows it's not legal, so it could cost him his career, and he could end up in jail. But he can't stop himself. And what is really, when you think about this, when you look at the psychology of this, there are a couple of things. First of all, we can ask, where's the empathy? The empathy with other human beings. Because I talked about the flow of energy from your higher self. And if you follow the golden rule, you receive more. Well, what is the golden rule really based on? It's based on empathy. And with empathy, I don't mean pity. I just mean empathy is basically the realization. I am not the only human being on the planet. Other people are here too. But beyond that, it's more that we are actually all connected. This is something that, again, science has proven. Quantum physics has proven everything in the universe is connected. So, if you go back before Einstein, before quantum physics, again, scientists had a dualistic view. There was energy and matter, two separate spheres. They could interact, but they were separate. There was mind and matter, totally separated. There are still many people who believe, scientists for example, that your consciousness is created by the brain. But if consciousness is created by the brain, then no morals apply. Then the pedophiles are right. They can do whatever they want. Why shouldn't they be able to? Their brains function in such a way they have a need to have sex with children, and they can't do anything else. And society should just allow this. So if we are having any kind of allegiance to the golden rule, that is because we are not physical beings. Our minds are not created by the brain. Our minds exist independently of the body. We are just using the body in this lifetime, and we have existed before and can exist later. So, in other words, the mind is who we are. And in our minds, we are all connected, like I said, the collective energy field. That's what you have a sense of when you follow the golden rule. The power elite that I'm talking about, they have lost that sense. Long time ago, many lifetimes ago. They're in a state of mind where they firmly believe in separation. Because what do you realize when you're all connected? Why should we follow the golden rule? Well, you could say the golden rule is put upon you from religion, from without. No, when you reach a certain level of consciousness, the golden rule comes from the inside, because you realize, if we are all connected, what I do to you has an effect on myself. If I'm harming you, I'm actually harming myself. That's why I follow the golden rule. Because it's what's best for myself. But you see, when you are in this state of mind where you believe in separation, you believe, You are a completely separate being. Epstein believed he was a completely separate being from the girls he was abusing. Therefore, he could believe what I'm doing to them has no negative effect on myself. That's what this entire class of power elite people, they believe. They're in this state of mind. They've been in this state of mind for lifetimes. Many of these people that you see today, that are the dictators still in the world, the billionaires, the political leaders, they have been leaders in the past. You just need to look at the past. You see how many societies that were elitist societies. Basically, every society before democracy was fundamentally an elitist society. There was always a small elite. And this elite always believed they were separate from the people, they were fundamentally superior to the people, therefore they had a right to do whatever they wanted, regardless of the consequences it had for the people. Once you see this, once this snaps into focus, you gain an entirely different perspective on history. Because history has been driven by elites and their quest for the impossible. As I said, Putin's quest has now caused 1 million of his own people to be killed or wounded for life. Does he care? No. Why should he? Look at the effect that Epstein's escapades had on his victims. Did he care? No. Do the other people who were his clients, do they seem to care? Well, not so far. How can you not care? Because you belong to this group of people who have lost any sense of connection to anything beyond the material world. They don't believe there's a God. They don't believe there's an afterlife. They don't believe there's karma. They believe they can do whatever they want and get away with it. Why? Because for a long time, for many embodiments, they have managed to do whatever they wanted and get away with it by causing people to submit. You see, many spiritual people are open to karma, right? But karma is not just an individual thing. So you take, for example, Hitler. Yeah, Hitler personally made a lot of karma. But the people who supported him in Germany, who believed in him, who thought he was the greatest leader ever, they shared in that karma. And this is what is, from a spiritual perspective, called karma dodging, where there is this small elite of people who are doing whatever they want, but because they set themselves up as leaders and get others to follow them, the people who follow them share in the karma. They are taking on some of the karma. And they're also giving their positive energy to the leader so that he can seem powerful. So there is this, relationship between some of these leaders and the people who blindly follow them. And this is what allows these leaders to exist, but it also what allows them to feel, oh, I can get away with anything. The law of karma doesn't apply to me. Because even though they are making tremendous karma, the people who submit to them are helping them escape the consequences, at least the physical consequences. So again, you take a person, let's say this has been one of the Roman emperors who later embodied as a king or nobleman in medieval Europe, and is now embodied as a rich and powerful financier, let's say Epstein. And he thinks he can get away with anything because he has in past lives. And so by getting people to submit to him, they are taking on some of the karma so that he can still exist physically. But the price he pays is that in his energy field, in his emotional, mental, identity minds, he still feels the tension. And the tension builds up, he has to release it, and therefore he's on this seesaw constantly, treadmill. And but what we have to wonder is, why are these people in this state of mind? How did they get themselves in that state of mind? And what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to walk a delicate balance, because obviously I know very well that there's a psychological mechanism called scapegoating, right? So you see, for example, Hitler. He used scapegoating. He told the German people, the economic problems you see in Germany are not your fault, it's the Jews. So the Jews became Hitler's scapegoat. So I know that there is this tendency. So if this idea of a power elite became widely accepted, many people would turn the power elite into a scapegoat and say, okay, let's just kill all the rich and powerful people and we'll solve all problems on earth. That's not what I'm advocating, not at all. I'm advocating raising awareness about these people so we don't give them energy. But we still have to recognize that these people, they're not fundamentally different from you and I, but they are in a fundamentally different state of mind because they have no empathy. They have no connection to any higher reality. You can see Elon Musk, who said that the downfall of Western civilization is empathy. Well, that's because he is in that state of mind, has no connection to any higher reality. So, what is it we actually see with these people? We actually see that when you have this intuitive recognition of the golden rule, when you have empathy, when you have a sense we're all connected. Why is that? Because you realize, you experience intuitively, there's some reality beyond your own mind. There's a higher reality beyond your own mind. The golden rule, it's enlightened self-interest, but it's enlightened self-interest because there is some reality. I mean, the golden rule was not defined in your mind, or my mind, or anybody else's mind. It's simply a universal principle for how the world works. But this power elite people I'm talking about, they have lost that sense. And therefore they believe that there is no higher reality than their own minds. They, in fact, can define reality, what's real and unreal. So we could say, if we look at it from a spiritual perspective, we can say that there is a spiritual realm. There's some kind of being in that realm. There could be many beings that have created the material world, and they have defined certain principles, including the golden rule. And we human beings, we can come to discover those principles, and the more we do, and the more we align ourselves with them, the better our lives will be. That's the process many spiritual people are engaged in, walking the spiritual path, raising our consciousness. Right? But this class of power elite people, they're not recognizing that. They believe the ultimate authority is them, their own minds. They are like God-like figures who can define what's real and unreal. And they always define it from themselves, based on their own interest. Their own self-interest. They are completely swallowed up, blinded by self-interest. No empathy, no considerations for other people. They really believe that they should be allowed to run the world, and that the world would be better off if they did. But look at the past. What was the Roman Empire? These exact people were running the Roman Empire. Did it work out well? Not really. In the long run, certainly not. So what basis do they have for saying they could do better? They, for example, they don't like democracy. None of them like democracy because they think they could do better. But so far, the people in democracies have created less disasters than the dictatorial leaders of the past. So what evidence do they really have? And that's what we need to come to see. We, the people, don't need the elite to govern our societies. On the contrary, we need to get the elite out of having influence on society. Then we would be better off. Okay, so now we need to take one step further, and then we are pretty much at the deepest understanding of this. So what I explained in my video about how the world was created is, well, okay. First of all, you need to recognize the world has a purpose. There's a purpose for the creation of the world we live in. And it's not the purpose that's created by religion, that there's this God up there who wants to be worshipped by human beings. Neither is it a materialist that it's all just chance, random events that created this enormously complex world. The world is actually created as an educational institution. And you can only understand this when you realize, as I said, in a higher realm, you have a higher self. That higher self is not created as a complete, perfect being. It's created as an evolving being. It's meant to evolve and grow over time, expand its awareness of how the world works, raise your consciousness to higher and higher levels. And one of the ways that your higher self does this is by sending an extension of itself into embodiment, for example, on Earth. But there are other planets, of course. So you exist here on Earth because your higher self is in the process of expanding its understanding, its awareness of how the world works. How do we expand our understanding? Because we have free will, so we can make choices. We can experiment, we can do things. So you could say again, as I said, the universe is a kind of mirror, right? You take an action, you see the result of your action, you evaluate. Was this a good idea? Do I want more of the same, or do I want something different? Because if I want something different coming back from the cosmic mirror, I have to send something different out. And that means I have to raise my awareness so I can send something, so I can do something better the next time that gives me a better result. So in other words, it can become a positive spiral of you expanding your awareness of how the universe works and what helps you to get the life circumstances you want. And this can, go to higher and higher levels. So, but how can you exercise your free will? How do you exercise your free will? Well, you have two basic ways of exercising your free will. You can exercise it based on the golden rule and a recognition that we're all connected. Therefore, what you do to others, you are actually doing to yourself. Why should you do to others what you want others to do to you? Because what you do to others is what the universe, the cosmic mirror, will reflect back to you. So in essence, what you do to others, you're doing to yourself. This is what you grasp when you have this inner connection to some higher reality than your own mind. But the other way of exercising your free will is you can go into what I call this illusion that we are separate beings. And in order to do that, you use a specific state of consciousness that I, in many of my videos, are called the duality consciousness. I have a whole playlist about duality. I also talk about it in my playlist about non-duality. So the idea here is that in the duality consciousness, you're not seeking to connect to a reality defined by a higher mind. You are seeking to define reality in your own mind and superimpose that, project that upon the universe. In other words, in your mind you create an idea. This is how the universe should work, and you try to project that upon the world. When you are exercising your free will as a connected being, you're saying, oh, there is a specific way the universe works that my mind didn't define. I don't know it all right now, but I know that by raising my awareness, I can discover more and more of how the world actually works, the principles that were defined by a higher mind. When you go into this separation, you lose all of that, and now you're saying, oh, the world just works the way I want it to work. So in other words, you're defining a worldview based on yourself being the center. You're the most important person. You're the one who can do everything you want. This is exactly what these dictators of the past did. This is exactly what Hitler did. This is what Putin is doing today. This is what Jeffrey Epstein did. The world works this way. I have a right to have sex with young girls. It's okay. However he justified it in his mind. I'm sure he had a worldview where he felt it was completely justified, what he did. So what I'm saying is, there is a special group of people who have been in embodiment for a very long time and who are completely blinded by this state of consciousness. They really believe they are gods who can define how the world should work based on themselves being the center of the universe. This is a very, very special group of people. Now, as I said, some of these people have been in this state of mind for a very long time. In my video about how the world is created, I talk about how there have actually been previous spheres or previous worlds than ours. And that some beings in these previous spheres, they chose to go into this separate state of consciousness. I also explained that these spheres evolve. So they start out just like ours is now, unfinished. But then the beings who live in the sphere, they gradually raise it to a point where it can ascend to a higher level. And what that means is that the majority of the people in the sphere, they consciously, voluntarily give up the possibility of using your free will as a separate being. They say, we've done enough of that, we don't want to do this anymore. We want to exercise our free will based on the fact that we're all connected, we're all part of a whole. We give up the possibility of harming other people, forcing other people. And then the sphere ascends. But there were some beings that didn't want to make that choice. They didn't want to give up the separate free will. They then fell into our sphere. So there are some beings who have been in this state of consciousness for a very, very long time. And it's not that they couldn't change, they couldn't go out of it, because they could come to a point where they realize, oh, this is all vanity. It means nothing. All of this effort I put in, it's gotten me nowhere. I've had enough of it. They could do that. But what I'm saying is, until they make that switch, they are completely anchored in a state of mind where they believe they are right. They have a right to define their worldview, they have the right to live their worldview the way they want, and they have a right to superimpose that upon others to get other people to support their worldview. And this is what keeps them in power. Okay? Go back to Hitler. He took advantage of the fact that the German nation was in a very bad state economically after the First World War, and he channeled the people's anger, and he created a worldview that, of course, was completely out of touch with the Golden Rule. I mean, hallelujah. How do you go from the Golden Rule to 6 million people in concentration camps? But he managed to get a majority of the German people to accept this worldview. And I'm just using this as an example of how these people, they are so sure that they're right, so absolutely convinced that they're right. And this can cause many other people who are not as sure to submit to them and actually believe in them. There were people who believed in Hitler. There are still some people who believe in Hitler. And this is what gave Hitler the power. So it becomes a self-reinforcing spiral. You know, Hitler projected this upon people initially, but then when people submitted to it, they gave him energy that made him more powerful. He could attract more people. And the spiral kept going until a certain point in the war. You will notice, if you look at the Second World War, first couple of years, the German army seemed invincible. Whatever they did, they just plowed through the opposition. That was because of all of the energy built up through Hitler's coming to power and all the meetings where people gave him the energy. But then there came a point, as I said, he had stolen this energy horizontally. He wasn't getting more from the spiritual realm. And so there simply came a point where the energy ran out, the energy balance went into a negative, and suddenly the German army started losing. And so what I'm trying to say is, what is happening in the world right now is that we still have the power elite. They're still the same people that were the feudal lords of medieval Europe, that were the Tsars of Russia, the Roman emperors, all of these insane leaders we see in the past. They're reincarnated as the power elite today. They're doing the same thing they've always done because they can't do anything else. They're completely trapped. They may have new ways of doing it, new ways of justifying what they're doing it, new ideologies and worldviews they're superimposing upon people. But the thing is, what allows them to stay in power is that the population is giving them energy. And the solution is not to get rid of them. The solution is that people become aware of this and stop giving them energy, because they don't have enough energy in their own energy fields to keep going. And this is actually exemplified in Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tale about the Emperor's New Clothes, where everybody in the court were convinced they were seeing this wonderful clothes that the emperor was wearing, that these fantastic tailors had tailored for the emperor. Until a little boy comes in and says, but the emperor has nothing on. And that's what happens when a critical mass of people see the power elite, see them for what they are, stop giving them energy. We don't even have to get rid of them. They will simply fall apart because they don't have the energy themselves to keep going. And when we stop feeding them our energy, they will deflate all of their schemes. All of these schemes. That's why Jesus said, the high shall be made low. And as I said in my previous video about the Epstein files, I hope this is what will be the outcome of this, that there will be more awareness of this power elite. Many people are, of course, already aware of it, but it hasn't reached that critical mass yet. It needs to come to a critical mass where people really see that the problem in society is the power elite, including the funneling of wealth up so that the top 2% control, 90% of the wealth in the world, which is completely insane. As I've said before, we have democratic nations that have a democratic political system, but a completely anti-democratic financial system. That's what needs to stop. We need to stop feeding our energy, our work, our lives into this machine. The self-glorification machine of these completely insane people who think they are gods on earth.